From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson here. And coming up today, K-State's Erick DeWolf will talk about the confirmation of rust disease in select wheat fields around Kansas. He's asking you producers to now be on the watch for signs of leaf and stripe rust in your stands. Then a guest speaker on the K-State campus this week from the University of Aberdeen, soil scientist Jim Prosser, who is a leader in the field of soil microbiomics research. He'll explain what that is and why it's considered a major step forward in soil science to the benefit of production agriculture. And on this week's horticulture segment, K-State's Raymond Cloyd returns with an update on lawn and garden insect pests. All that and more ahead on this Agriculture Today.
While many people know hunger is an issue in developing countries, it is also a problem in our own backyards. In 2010, 1 in 7 Kansans struggled to put adequate food on the table. 2 K-State research and extension programs are tackling this problem. The Family Nutrition Program and Expanded Food and Nutrition Education Program reach thousands of Kansans in more than 70 counties. They learn how to eat healthy with a low budget. For more information about these programs, visit ksre.ksu.edu.
You're listening to Agriculture Today, and with a word from wheat disease specialist with K-State Research and Extension, Erick DeWolf. Just a couple of weeks back, the hope was that rust diseases would be perhaps a lesser issue for you wheat growers this year, and that still could be the case. However, Erick's here to tell us today that rust disease has in fact now been identified in fields in parts of southern Kansas. Erick, shouldn't be a total shock here, but there's an earliness to this arrival, you say.
Well, there is a concern here because of the earliness, so it's not unusual for us to find some rust in the south-central region the last week of April or so. But we also have a complication because of the variability in planting date this year. So we have a more normal planted, or what we might call an early crop this year, and then almost an entirely separate crop that was planted after our rainy October last fall. And those crops may handle this disease in very different ways because of the difference in growth stages.
In other words, that later planted crop you think may be more vulnerable to rust pressure?
I think so. So there's a couple complications there. The yield potential of this later crop may be lower because in many cases it just didn't have the chance to stool out or tiller in the fall, and is often in a much more thin, sparse type of stand situation. The lower yield potentials complicate the economics then. Is the yield potential justify an additional fungicide? Now, we can also layer on top of that the later growth and development means that the rust may in fact get established in these later maturing fields at an earlier growth stage. So even though 2 side-by-side fields might be infected on the same day, it's the relative growth stage that weed is at that's really important, with the idea that the earlier the disease gets established, the more potential for yield loss that it causes.
Conversely, those fields that were planted on the earlier side may have a leg up on rust diseases?
Well, I believe so. So in many years in Kansas, we're in a situation where the rust is developing as we enter the grain filling stages of growth, and it doesn't really get too much of a foothold until the later stages of grain fill. And in many cases, it's kind of a race to the finish. Can the crop finish filling its grain prior to the time that the rust builds up to damaging levels on those upper leaves that are so important to the yield potential?
Now, to bring folks up to the moment, rust diseases have been confirmed in a handful of southern Kansas counties to this point anyway, correct?
That's right. So we had an initial report from Reno County near the Atkinson experiment station that K-State Research and Extension has in that area. And then towards the end of the week, last week, and then again early part of this week, we've had an additional set of counties in that same area that have also shown up positive as well. So they include Edwards, Hodgman, Gray, Finney, counties, just a little bit to the west of that Reno County area. So it's a little early to tell what the full distribution is. The rust that we are hearing of and have seen ourselves is been at fairly low levels. So this is way less than 1% of the plants that have the disease at this point, and it's still at the lower levels. But it is cause for concern, and it's important for growers to keep tabs on the situation in their own fields so that they can make a good decision when they do reach the critical growth stages for fungicide application.
So that's important to emphasize here. It's not time to pull the trigger by any respect on fungicides?
No, I don't believe so. I think the call right now, or the prudent thing to be doing, is just checking fields and setting priorities. Usually the most beneficial fungicides are not applied until we get the flag leaf out. I'd like to see us at least at flag leaf emergence, and preferably even though the flag leaf fully out. In most situations, the most successful or profitable fungicides are even applied a little closer to the boot or heading stages of growth, as long as the disease isn't too severe.
And looking ahead, can we draw any definitive conclusions as to how much more rust pressure may show up given these confirmations so far?
Well, so we know that in the big disease years, outbreak years for stripe rust and leaf rust, it's not uncommon for us to see the rust get established in southern Kansas by mid-April. So we're not that far off that pace. So there's at least cause for concern here. The wild card, of course, is in so many layers of agriculture, is weather, right? And if we get into a period of cool, rainy weather, the stripe rust that's being reported in this area may really accelerate. If we are warm and wet, the leaf rust may dominate. So we have multiple threats kind of at low levels there, and if we get into a favorable period for either disease, we could see the diseases get out of hand. Now, likewise, if conditions do turn off dry, or heaven forbid, hot and dry, that often suppresses our disease development. And in that situation, our diseases likely wouldn't get established and cause much potential for yield loss there. But the downside is our yield potential of our crop would also suffer under those same conditions.
And it gets back to the core issue that you brought up earlier. How much does one want to invest further in a wheat crop, particularly late planted wheat, because there is a cost, obviously, to fungicide use. And there is a K-State publication that can help producers walk through that decision.
There are a couple that can help people. One of them would be the foliar fungicide efficacy publication. The 2019 version of that was just released a couple weeks ago. And then that's available online. The second publication that people might consider is evaluating the need for foliar fungicides in wheat. And that is designed specifically to help people walk through what are they seeing, observing in the field, what is the local or regional risk scenario for the different diseases, and how does that match up with their variety susceptibility, and tries to put actual probabilities or the odds of seeing an above average, more than 4 bushel type of yield response from their fungicide.
Those publications are put out for just these situations, and you can find those at the K-State Research and Extension bookstore. One final thing here, and Eric, in a recent Agronomy e-update article, you talked of the prospect of split fungicide applications for winter wheat. In the case of these iffy fields, the late planted fields, would putting part of your fungicide application on early and then waiting to see what happens be a prudent strategy?
Well, so I think there's a number of kind of split application approaches here. So probably the one that's most widely marketed is to use a low labeled rate of the fungicide prior to jointing, or between green up and the jointing stages of growth, and then come back a second time with a full labeled rate of a fungicide around the flag leaf emergence through heading stages of growth. Now, in the research that I've done on these split fungicide applications, it's often that second fungicide application that really does the heavy lifting when it comes to maintaining the yield potential of the crop. So almost 50% of the fields here in Kansas are probably past that jointing stages of growth. And at this point, they're probably a week to 2 weeks at the most in many areas of south central Kansas from having a flag leaf fully out and being at that time when we typically would be looking at our fungicide applications going on to protect the flag leaf. So for those growers that are already there, I think they would just focus on the single late fungicide application, and that's where their priority should be. For growers that are in the north central, northwest areas, maybe where they're still prior to joint, there may be some possibilities there, but again, I would caution that it's often that second fungicide application that does the heavy lifting here. Mm-hmm. So it might be warranted to go in early with a fungicide if they were seeing tan spot or if they were seeing some rust get established early in these fields as well. And that would set them up for a larger yield loss than they might otherwise experience.
One important consideration, though, if one does go this route, split applications, they have to be sure that the total rate between the two applications does not exceed the label.
Well, that's right. So, there's a subtle difference in the wording that I said there, too, is that I think we're often seeing people use different products, different modes of action or active ingredients for these fungicides. Many times the same active ingredient is used in premixes as well. So I guess what we're trying to get at here is that there's a total maximum amount of each active ingredient or molecule that you're allowed to apply within a growing season. That information is specifically outlined on the product label. So it's important to be changing products, changing active ingredients from a label perspective, but also from a resistance management perspective here as well. So it's not only the regulations of this, but there's some practical biological reasons why we don't want to keep riding these same active ingredients time and time again.
Well, off we go, Eric, with the confirmation of rust disease in Kansas wheat at a very minimal level to the moment, and so we'll likely have you back for a full update and briefing on disease pressure on the Kansas wheat crop as we move forward here in the coming weeks. Thanks for coming over.
You're welcome.
That from wheat disease specialist Erick DeWolf of K-State Research and Extension. By the way, a good way to keep up on what's happening on this front is to use the aforementioned Agronomy e-update series at agronomy.ksu.edu. Those e-updates are posted each Friday afternoon. And you're listening to Agriculture Today.
What is radon? Home exposure to radon gas is the leading cause of lung cancer death in the United States for non-smokers. In Kansas, 1 in 4 homes will test at or above the EPA action level. The Surgeon General recommends all homes be tested and fixed if necessary. Visit kansasradonprogram.org for more information. Test, fix, save a life. This message brought to you by the Kansas Radon Program, the Kansas Association of Broadcasters, and this station.
Welcome back. You are listening to Agriculture Today. It's our pleasure now on this part of the broadcast to have a special guest, Mike Side, who has been brought in to the K-State campus to present the 4th Chuck and Sue Rice International Agronomy Lecture here at K-State. And this series brings in experts from various aspects of agronomy research from around the globe to talk about their work and some of the contemporary ideas that are out there. This year's lecturer happens to hail from the University of Aberdeen in Scotland, where he serves as a professor of environmental microbiology. A pleasure to have Jim Prosser, Mike's Side. Thanks, Jim, for sharing a few moments with us, first of all.
My pleasure.
And welcome to Kansas State University. Tell us about this area of research that you'll be speaking on while here at K-State. You'll be talking about harnessing soil and plant microbiomics. And that latter term, microbiomics, might not be familiar to a lot of folks, so explain that if you would.
Okay, so my background is in soil microbiology, and we actually focus on one group of microorganisms that are involved in the nitrification process in soil. So this is the process by which ammonium is converted into nitrite and then nitrate. And it's important for two reasons. Firstly, it's responsible for massive loss of nitrogen fertilizer, ammonia-based fertilizers from the soil system. So enormous economic losses globally are caused by these organisms. And secondly, these organisms produce either directly or indirectly the greenhouse gas nitrous oxide. And the term microbiomics has been used over the last few years to describe microbial communities, but microbial communities in the context of the environments in which they exist. So what the term microbiomics is meant to imply is that there are links between environments and the communities, the microbial communities in those environments. So, as an example, the plant microbiome is the microbial community associated with the plant, and the structure of the community and its presence results from the activities of the plant. So, for example, the plant might release organic carbon, might release nutrients into the soil on which the bacteria grow, the microorganisms grow, and the nature of those compounds might determine which bacteria grow. So that's where the term comes from. And maybe I should also say a bit about the importance of microorganisms in the soil. By definition, microorganisms are invisible to the naked eye. We need microscopes to see them. And because of that, the role of microorganisms in soil and in agriculture is often overlooked and neglected. But if you could weigh all of the organisms in the soil, which includes soil animals as well as microorganisms, in a grassland soil, the weight of that material, the weight of that biomass, if you like, per hectare is equivalent to several thousand sheep per hectare. So it's a considerable amount of biomass is present in the soil, and the microorganisms have very diverse metabolisms, so they have diverse functions. They're important in maintaining soil structure, and they also have important interactions with crops that ensure that the crops can grow and produce high yield.
This is a complex area, though, because, as is evident here, microbial activity can be a positive for crop production through the conversion of nitrogen, ammonia. It can also be a negative in terms of activity that would be detrimental to crop productivity and a plant's function, right?
Absolutely. So to give you an example of two groups of organisms that have very close interactions, beneficial interactions with plants, one group of organisms are what we call nitrogen-fixing bacteria, and they convert atmospheric nitrogen. Around about 80% of the atmosphere is nitrogen gas, and they convert that into nitrogen that can be used by the plant, and they grow on the plant roots. So they're very important for the nitrogen nutrition of the plant. Another group of organisms are fungi, which will infect, if you like, colonize plant roots, and they are very important for phosphorus nutrition. So they're quite specific interactions that are beneficial for plants and are beneficial for a wide range of plants and a wide range of crops. But on the other side of the coin, you have plant pathogens, microbial pathogens, fungal pathogens and bacterial pathogens, which are major causes of plant disease and crop disease. So there are beneficial and detrimental specific interactions between plants and microorganisms. So what we've had to do over the years is to develop techniques that don't just tell us who's there, but tell us what they're doing. And that's been a major challenge, to develop techniques that enable us to find out what these organisms are doing so that we can understand their ecology, so that we can optimize interactions between microbes and plants for the benefit of agriculture, and also so that we can understand their fundamental ecology.
So have those capabilities been fully achieved at this point, or still a ways to go?
I don't think you ever fully achieve anything in science, but right. Certainly we're a lot further on than we were 20 years ago. And one of the the big techniques that's being used is a technique called metagenomics, where rather than looking at sequence information on an individual gene, we try to sequence every gene in our environmental sample, in our soil sample or our plant root sample, for example. And then by comparing those gene sequences with sequences that we have in databases, we can get some idea of the functions of the gene products in the organisms that are present and some idea of the potential functions, the potential activities that are going on in the environment. That technique has a number of technical limitations, as do all techniques, but there are also conceptual limitations, and it's those conceptual limitations which I'm particularly interested in and which we require solutions to before we could say we were getting near to be fully, those techniques were getting near to be fully developed. But we've taken major steps forward, and for me, I'm biased maybe, but for me this is one of the most exciting areas in ecology and maybe in biology.
Because it opens up so many vistas and potential applications to, say, crop production issues, for instance.
Yes. Well, first of all, as I said, what we have discovered is diversity that we didn't know existed in things that we knew about. Whole new groups of microorganisms. So imagine if you didn't know insects existed and then you discovered that they did, but you didn't have the faintest idea what they were doing. That's the position we're in. As well as trying to determine the significance of the diversity of things that we already knew about, there are these other massive, abundant groups of microorganisms that we didn't even know existed, and therefore we'd never seen them in the lab, and therefore we didn't have the faintest idea what they were doing. Well, using these metagenomic and other similar techniques, we can find out what they might be doing in the soil and in their interactions with plants. And the ways in which they can help agriculture are by improving existing ways in which we try to harness the power of microorganisms in providing these beneficial properties, these providing nutrients and protecting them from disease, but also when we use commercial inoculant, when we inoculate the soil with organisms that will help crop growth. One of the problems, for example, is that we don't know how, or it's difficult to study how these organisms interact with the native community, how they invade that community to benefit the plant, and how they impact on that community, whether they have detrimental effects on the indigenous communities. Using these techniques, for the first time, we're able to start to address these issues.
So it really is embarking on a whole new horizon of scientific advance, broadly speaking. That's not an overstatement, it doesn't sound.
Absolutely not. No, this is a whole new frontier that we're investigating. And it's not an exaggeration to say I genuinely believe it's the most exciting area in ecology. But it doesn't get the profile that it deserves because we can't actually see the organisms. But these organisms are much more important for the environment and for agriculture than the things we can see.
Well, hopefully the scientific community will continue talking up the value of microbiomics as a research field and further uncover important information along this line that will be of benefit not only to production agriculture but to a wide swath of positive causes out there. Jim, thank you for coming over, sharing your story on your research. Wishing you well with your presentation here at Kansas State University on this topic of harnessing soil and plant microbiomics for agriculture. Appreciate your time right here.
Many thanks for this opportunity.
He is presenting the 2019 Chuck and Sue Rice International Agronomy Lecture here at Kansas State University. Jim Prosser, Professor of Environmental Microbiology at the University of Aberdeen. That is located, of course, in Scotland. You're listening to Agriculture Today, and we'll be back shortly on the K-State Radio Network.
Did you know every Kansas farmer feeds 128-plus people?
Kansas farmers are hard workers, dependable, authentic, and sensitive.
Not only do farmers put food on your table, but they put clothes on your back and fuel in your car.
For more information about Kansas farmers, visit K-State Research and Extension online or stop by your local Extension office. This message has been brought to you by the K-State Animal Sciences Leadership Academy participants.
Agriculture Today continues now here on the K-State Radio Network. Erick Atkinson here. Today's agricultural news headlines coming your way now, courtesy in part of DTN. Well, hours after National Economic Council Chief Larry Kudlow said that things were close in terms of announcing the next round of in-person U.S.-China trade talks, the White House said that the U.S. Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer and Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin will be heading to Beijing for meetings that start next Tuesday. A team led by Chinese Vice Premier Liu He will then come to Washington on May the 8th to continue those discussions. Now, next week's talks in Beijing will cover forced technology transfer, non-tariff barriers, enforcement and purchases, in addition to other topics. A date for a signing summit between President Trump and Chinese President Xi Jinping has not yet been set. However, contacts note that the president has an opening in his schedule between a trip to Japan in late May and a trip to the United Kingdom and France in early June. As for the U.S.-China talks, Kudlow says, quoting him here, "We are not there yet, but we have made a heck of a lot of progress." He went on to say, again quoting, "We have come further and deeper, broader, larger scale than anything in the history of U.S.-China trade." What is still being worked on, Kudlow said, are so-called structural issues. Technology transfers, ownership enforcement is absolutely crucial, he says, and lowering barriers to buy and sell agriculture and industrial commodities. In his words again, it is all on the table. The Waters of the U.S. rule from the Environmental Protection Agency is in the process of being replaced. Todd Domer reports here there is widespread support for the new rule among private and public interests here in Kansas.
If fully implemented, the new rule would replace the 2015 version promulgated under the Obama administration. Governor Laura Kelly and several of her cabinet secretaries collectively submitted comments suggesting the proposed rule is better aligned with existing Kansas law and water quality standards. The state agencies support the rule's exclusion of groundwater, stock watering ponds, ditches, and ephemeral features from the WOTUS definition. Joining Governor Kelly in signing the comments were the secretaries of the Kansas Department of Agriculture, Kansas Department of Health and Environment, Kansas Department of Wildlife, Parks and Tourism, and Kansas Water Office. In addition, Kansas Attorney General Derek Schmidt filed comments urging EPA to adopt the new WOTUS rule. He and 16 other state attorneys general suggested the proposed rule protects water quality while respecting the intent of the Clean Water Act and the regulatory authority of states. I'm Todd Domer.
And July the 1st has now been set at the first day enhancements to federal livestock and dairy insurance products will be available for policyholders. More on that from the USDA's Rod Bain.
New enhancements to federal livestock and dairy insurance programs are set to take effect starting July 1st, designed to provide more efficient levels of coverage, according to USDA Risk Management Agency Administrator Martin Barbary.
What these changes mean for producers is that it's going to make our products much more available.
For instance, removal of the livestock capacity limitation in livestock gross margin per the 2018 Bipartisan Budget Act will allow more coverage for that product. Improvements to livestock risk protection include expanded coverage for swine, fed, and feeder cattle to all states, and increased per head and annual head limits. While for the Dairy Revenue Program,
we expanded the range of butterfat that could be covered under the policy, so that allows more flexibility for dairy producers to insure the product.
More details on these enhancements are available through local crop and livestock insurance agents or online at www.rma.usda.gov. I'm Rod Bain reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
We'll be reminding you beef cattle producers of this upcoming event frequently in the weeks ahead, but just to note right here, K-State's College of Veterinary Medicine will be hosting the second K-State Symposium on bovine anaplasmosis. This is a producer-oriented workshop, and it is set for Monday, May the 20th at the Hilton Garden Inn here in Manhattan. This will be an excellent program. Many expertise speakers coming in to talk over dealing with this cattle disease. If you'd like to know more information, go to the College of Veterinary Medicine website and look under Alumni and Events. Now it's on to this week's Kansas Soybean Update with Greg Akagi. Greg?
Gretchen Sassenrath, K-State research agronomist at the Southeast Research Extension Center, joins us. And Gretchen, you've been a part of research funded by the Kansas Soybean Commission that showed many benefits when planting a mustard cover crop.
The mustard, first of all, it's not the weed mustard. This mustard has high glucosinolate concentration, and the glucosinolate improves the soil microbes and controls some of the biological pests that occur in the soil, and it does this naturally. So the glucosinolates reduce the amount of fungus that causes charcoal rot. That's what we've been focusing on with this research. We find by using the cover crop, the mustard cover crop, we see a reduction in the amount of fungus, this macrophyllina, that causes charcoal rot. We actually didn't see a difference in soybean yield with using the mustard, but we saw a huge reduction in the amount of charcoal rot disease that was present both in the soil and in the plant. Charcoal rot is an endemic disease in southeast Kansas. It occurs under wet conditions, and we certainly have that in southeast Kansas. It is everywhere. It's in all the soil. It's kind of a natural ingredient of our soils. And so we don't always have a particular outbreak of it that's causing a yield reduction. The past couple of years have been kind of mild for it, but it's always there. And what we've seen with using this mustard cover crop, it will reduce the amount of fungus that causes the charcoal rot disease.
In so many ways, you could look at this as really a holistic approach.
That is exactly right. It's kind of like you want to keep yourself healthy, and then you'll be more immune to colds and flu that come around. That's exactly what this is. It's building the soil up and allowing the microbes in the soil to be healthier and support the soybean production better.
We had mentioned this project was funded by the Kansas Soybean Commission, but I also know you had other funding revenue sources as well and help on this project. USDA
also provides funding for this. I'd also really like to recognize my collaborators, especially plant pathologist Chris Little. He does a lot of the work with counting the colony-forming units and identifying the bacteria, and also Shamal Lin and Craig Ruzaboom, both in agronomy at K-State.
All right, Gretchen, we appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
That is Gretchen Sassenrath, K-State Research Extension agronomist at the Southeast Research Extension Center, who joins us on the Kansas Soybean Update. It's brought to you by the Kansas Soybean Commission.
Thanks, Greg. And this is Agriculture Today.
Did you eat today? Thank a farmer. A way to get more involved in agriculture is through 4-H and FFA. Through 4-H and FFA, we have been given multiple opportunities to grow as leaders and learn more about agriculture.
You can learn skills related to jobs, public speaking skills, and you get the opportunity to travel around the country and meet new people.
If you want more information about getting more involved in 4-H and FFA, visit them on their websites at kansasffa.org and kansas4h.org.
We're back on Agriculture Today and finishing out with this week's K-State Horticulture segment. We've welcomed back by Raymond Cloyd, horticultural entomologist with K-State Research and Extension, for the very latest on what's going on insect-wise around our lawns and gardens in Kansas. Raymond, quite a few things, but we do want to remind folks at the outset here about one which we visited about a few weeks ago. The eastern tent caterpillar was just making its move then. What's the status report on it?
Yeah, Eric, the eastern tent caterpillar should be showing itself by right now. If you drive around the back roads or whatever, you should see these nests in the crotches of trees like pears, anything in the Rosaceae family. And as the leaves are coming out, the caterpillars start feeding on them. So it's one of our earliest, we call caterpillar defoliators. caterpillars. And so what you can do to avoid any problems is just take a rake or a hard force of water spray, blast the nest open, and the birds will eat them, eat the caterpillars. Really no need to spray because there's no foliage sometimes to spray, but just take a rake and disrupt the nest, and the caterpillars will be really exposed to birds or other vertebrates out there. But just be aware that, if the leaves are coming out on large trees, they're going to be out there feeding. And they do feed in the daytime, so you'll be able to see them.
And they will favor a variety of tree species, won't they?
They tend to feed on anything in the Rosaceae family, cherry and plum and prune, those trees like that, yeah. Mm-hmm.
But you want to get rid of them because they can cause some damage over time if you let them go unattended.
Well, absolutely. The thing that they're really they can cause substantial injury or damage because they eat the foliage as it comes out, so the tree never manufactures food, and it can actually stress it and set it back, yeah.
So deal with the eastern tent caterpillars, which will become more evident as the days move along here. You're getting questions, you say already, Raymond, about preeminent strikes against bagworms on ornamental evergreens. These are a perennial pest and they're a pain, but you're cautioning folks not to jump the gun here.
Absolutely. We have gotten some minor inquiries about especially preventative bagworm applications, and there are none, basically. And bagworms are not out yet. You wait till the end of May, beginning of June. That's when the eggs will hatch. That's when they'll be ballooning, which means they crawl to the top of a tree, form a string, and then get caught on wind currents and get ballooned around. If you wait till late May, early June, that's when they're going to be out. And I recommend weekly applications of like dipel or spinosad once a week, and you really that'll really do a job. Last year, that's what I did. I did weekly spray once a week for 4 weeks. The bagworms were infesting my junipers. Of course, last year was awful for bagworms, and after 4 or 5 weeks, the bagworms were dead, and my junipers and thuya rebounded, and I didn't have to spray anymore. So the timing is critical. You don't want to spray later on in the year, August or say July, August, because they're just going to be too big. Mm-hmm. And the materials you're going to use, which are called stomach poisons, are going to be less effective than they would early on when they're smaller.
So again, to stress, late May, early June.
Exactly.
That's the target period.
Just go out and look for the little, I would say, half-inch caterpillars in the bags, and that's when you want to be out there spraying thorough coverage of all plant parts, and then those weekly applications for about 4 weeks.
Now, just as a quick side note here, if one discovers upon inspection here in the next days a few bags left over established last season, go ahead and hand remove those. Will that help?
Well, if they're female bags, yeah. If they're male bags, won't make a difference because the males became a winged moth and in fall mated with the females and they died. But yeah, I mean, if you still have bags on your conifers or whatever trees, pick them off, put them in soapy water, and that should kill them, yeah.
All right. But as for spraying against bagworms in advance, don't do it. That's the point. Not until late May, early June would you treat your evergreens for bagworms. Pine sawfly, let's talk about this pest. You think it will debut here shortly?
It should be. The European pine sawfly is a pest. The eggs are laid by the females in the needles. They emerge, and then they tend to cluster on pines primarily. They are very specific, and they are very kind of light green. They can blend in, but you get up close, there's a lot of them together merging. They strip the needles off. They're not really going to kill a large tree, but they're going to make it look uglier because they're taking off the needles. And so you need to spray with some type of material. Now these are not caterpillars. They look like caterpillars, but they're sawflies. So dipel or thuricide will not work. That only kills caterpillars. So you have to get things like a pyrethroid or pyrethrins or even spinosad or something like that. But European pine sawfly is in the order Hymenoptera, not Lepidoptera. And so the dipel, which is the Bacillus thuringiensis subspecies Kiristaki, which is the most selective insecticide, and it's primarily for caterpillars, will not be effective on sawflies.
If, again, you let these go unattended or untreated, they won't kill the tree, but they'll simply make it cosmetically unappealing.
Yes, it would take a lot of them to do it, and they typically attack mature trees, Eric. Yeah. But again, I've seen it where there have been so many, they just strip the needles, and the plants just don't look very appealing.
All right, so be on the watch for pine sawfly activity on your evergreens, your pines obviously included, in your landscape, and take action accordingly. And you mentioned this one as a possible pest last time out, Raymond, and that is the lilac ash borer. Has it started to well up as well.
It should. I mean, the females should have been coming out, mating with the males. They'll lay the eggs on the bark of a lilac or ash tree. The eggs will, the larvae will emerge from the eggs, hatch, and tunnel into the tree. So one of the things you can do, if you have a history of a tree that has had lilac or ash borer, you can spray it with like permethrin. Permethrin is a pyrethroid insecticide, and use it as a barrier treatment. You spray it before they lay the eggs, and when the eggs hatch, they hit that barrier and are consequently killed. Yeah.
So you'd want that application to go on fairly soon.
You want it as soon as possible if you have this history of lilac or ash borers attacking your trees. You can always tell that is the pupal cases that protrude out of the holes later on. That's an indication your tree has been attacked by lilac or ash borers.
It is a borer by the definition.
It's a caterpillar borer. It's not a beetle borer. So systemic insecticides are not effective against it like they would be for the wood-boring insects, because Lepidoptera caterpillar borers move back and forth between the sapwood and heartwood. They don't reside strictly in the cambium area where most of your wood-boring insects, like emerald ash borer would be one, and the other wood-boring insects that are out there. So these permethrin barrier sprays are primarily what's going to lead to better performance and less problems with the lilac or ash borer.
Right, because here again, left without any kind of response, they could cause some damage that would be lasting.
Depending on the size of the tree and the level of the infestation, yes, they could, yes.
Mm-hmm. Raymond, a pleasure. We'll have you back soon.
I look forward to it, Eric. It's always fun.
Thanks for being along with us. Raymond Cloyd, horticultural entomologist, K-State Research and Extension, with this week's K-State Horticulture segment. And by the way, you can track what Raymond is reporting on lawn and garden insect activity regularly via the Extension Entomology newsletter. To find that, just go to entomology.ksu.edu. That is our time for today. Thanks for listening in. Erick Atkinson for Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network.